Then we got an update today on the Interstate Bridge Replacement Project. This is the bridge between Oregon and Washington that's been, I think they've been talking about this since like the early 2000s. Today, Governor Ferguson said we're going to build the bridge, but it's now going to happen in phases with construction, he says, starting in 2028. Contractor to be picked next year in 2027. So after that, 6 to 7 years before completion of this bridge. So Representative John Lee of Vancouver, not at all pleased with the delays, not at all pleased with the project as going forward and the design, which includes light rail across the new bridge. And today we got a new price tag update on the fixed span interstate bridge replacement project between Portland and Vancouver. This is the project that has been maybe close to 20 years in the making, to replace the existing century plus old bridge that crosses over the Columbia River. And today, Governor Bob Ferguson announced that the bridge replacement project updated cost estimate is $7.65 billion. Now, they say they currently have about 5.5 billion in federal and state promised funding for this bridge. But again, this is a scaled back version because before, at least the latest project estimates late last year, were to include a bunch of upgrades for interchanges on either side of the actual bridge itself. I think they're scaling that back now because it's gotten so out of control. The cost estimates are nobody can get on board with this thing. So, what was approved today, or what was projected today to be approved from Governor Ferguson, was again this $7+ billion project, $5.5 billion they have funding for. And the governor said construction will start in 2028. Now, mind you, this is still going to be 6 to 7 years after they first shovel the first dirt for this project before anybody's driving over the bridge. And it's going to have light rail. There's been a lot of pushback on that, but it's going to have light rail. What he said today, we're not going back. This is what's going to happen. So here is part of what Governor Ferguson said today at the press conference in announcing what they're moving ahead with.
More than 140,000 vehicles use the interstate bridge every single day. The current bridge, however, is not built to modern standards and is at risk of collapse in an earthquake. According to the environmental impact statement, quote, this collapse potential is due to the fact that hundreds of timber bridge support piles sit within loose sand that can liquefy during an earthquake. That's unacceptable. Like any major project of this magnitude, there's going to be good news and bad news along the way. Recently, we got some great news. The U.S. Coast Guard approved a fixed span for a replacement bridge instead of requiring us to build a movable span like the current bridge. We also recently received some not so good news. Not surprisingly, costs have gone up since our last projection several years ago. I'm here today with key project partners to make it clear that we are all committed to moving forward with a core set of projects to replace our bridge with a modern, fixed span structure, including light rail. The Interstate Bridge Replacement Program today released updated cost estimates. The program now estimates that will cost $7.65 billion to do the following: replace the northbound and southbound spans of the bridge, connect the new bridges to I-5, and extend light rail to Vancouver.
Now, back in late January, I had a chance to interview Representative John Lee of Vancouver, who is on the bi-state bipartisan work group that's been tracking all of the changes to the design through multiple federal administration changes. He is vehemently opposed to putting trains on the bridge, but we heard today from Governor Ferguson that train has left the station. It's going to happen. He says, we're not going back on any old design changes. So he says trains are certainly going to be on the new bridge. But Representative Lee tried to get a bill heard during this session to audit the entire program because they have spent millions, in fact, hundreds of millions of dollars on design, on consultants, on marketing for this, without anything even being finalized. We don't even still have the federally approved environmental impact statements. Uh, Apparently that's coming in later this year. And Governor Ferguson said today things will not be, off track as a result of whatever the feds he expects to get from them. But here's what Representative John Lee had to say about this project in my conversation with him in late January.
I've been watching the I-5 Interstate Bridge Replacement Program for well over a decade, back when it was the Columbia River crossing. It's an outrageous boondoggle. It started at low end of 3.2 billion. It has now exploded. 2 weeks ago, we learned the top end could be over $18 billion. It's ridiculous. The amount of money that they've spent is about $250 million. So late this afternoon, I filed the bill calling for a performance audit of the entire program. Not only do we want to know, is the money properly accounted for, but are they doing what they're supposed to? The initial proposal was transit was $2 billion out of the $7.5 billion project, over a quarter of it. Absolutely ridiculous. They're replacing a 3-lane bridge with another 3 through-lane bridge. Ridiculous when the West Coast, hugely bad in terms of traffic congestion. Everybody's stuck. We got to dig in before we waste 6, 8, 10, 12, $17 billion of the people's money. It's ridiculous, and we've got to stop it. We don't want a big dig like Boston. We don't want a California high-speed rail that wastes huge amounts of the people's money and delivers nothing.
Now, remember, the project would also update the 5-mile stretch of the I-5 corridor around the bridge, including, I think there were 7 highway interchanges. They wanted to replace the North Portland Harbor Bridge. The full cost, if you include everything they wanted to do and they still plan to do in phases later, I guess, is $14.5 billion. So during the press conference today, when Governor Ferguson was asked about future funding, phases of the projects, how are you going to get that funding? Will you get that funding? He basically gave no definitive answer. He said, we'll get to that bridge. We'll cross a bridge when we get there. Right. That's probably a bad thing to say on this project, but offered no specifics whatsoever. But again, 2028, he says they will begin construction. No specifics again today on who's going to build this thing. What's the contract look like? I guess everything's out for bids now. Sometime next year, we'll find out who the contractor is going to be for this. Oregon and Washington are certainly going to fight for, their union labor to have a piece of the pie, and I'm sure that'll be shared. But that's going to be another interesting angle that we promise to follow on this.